a deep silence, a white void stretching into infinity. The night is pitch black and quiet, but behind this silence lies a great danger. You are sleeping at night in the Arctic when you are suddenly awakened by the sound of grunting. A white shadow, weighing tons, gigantic in size, with huge claws, hovers around us. Here is the biggest predator of the North. Polar bear. When faced with a polar bear, your chances of survival are slim to none. The world's largest land predator, it has the power to knock down its prey with a single claw strike. Their sense of smell is so keen that they can smell food up to 30 kilometers away. But the Inuit have been living in this land for thousands of years, living in the same environment as polar bears. So how do the Inuit cope with these bears, which pose a great security threat, without modern weapons and high-tech security measures? The first rule of the Inuit art of survival was to read nature. For them, the greatest security measure was learning to live with threats. Knowing the hunting habits of polar bears, predicting their movements, and taking the right precautions accordingly were the greatest security measures for them. In this documentary, we will closely explore how the Inuit people deal with polar bears, the methods they use to protect themselves, and their traditional defense methods. In the Arctic, the boundary between being the prey and remaining the hunter is as fluid as the direction of the wind. Polar bears are among the most ruthless killers in this region. They are not only strong, but also patient and intelligent. They can track their prey for days, even weeks. Thanks to the wind, they can smell the slightest scent from kilometers away, and, when necessary, they can remain motionless for hours, waiting for their prey. The Inuit knew that the only way to survive in this dangerous environment was to understand it. The art of survival was not about pushing bears away, but anticipating their moves. Knowing which way the wind was blowing, recognizing the smallest footprint in the snow, and anticipating the polar bear's intentions could mean the difference between life and death for the Inuit. To understand the direction of the wind, the Inuit would wet their fingers, hold them up, and feel which way the wind was blowing. If the wind was blowing behind them, it was a great threat to them, because the wind could easily carry their scent to a polar bear. This meant that they could become prey to a nearby bear. Another way, the Inuit would follow footprints in the snow, because for them, these footprints did not tell them that a bear had passed by, but rather the bear's state of mind. A bear that moved with a steady and determined step would most likely be on the hunt for prey. But if the tracks in the snow were irregular and scattered, it was clear that the bear was not hungry and was just wandering around. One of the Inuits' most effective methods of protection from bears was to listen to the breathing of the approaching bear to predict what it would do. When they listened to the bear, if they heard low and steady breathing, they knew it was a non-aggressive bear. But if they heard intermittent and deep breathing, they knew that danger was approaching. The Inuit passed these methods down from generation to generation and learned to survive with polar bears. Although these methods worked, the polar bear's sensitivity to odors, even from kilometers away, sometimes made them ineffective, and something else had to be done. When polar bears were hungry, they would search for food by tracking scents in the environment. Since a polar bear smelling the food in the Inuit habitat would be a deadly threat to them, food had to be carefully hidden, odors camouflaged and campsites chosen with great care. Because once a polar bear smelled food, it was almost impossible to stop it. That's why the Inuit always stored their food away from the camp. The food was always stored in high warehouses built high above the ice, because it was very difficult for bears to reach these heights. These warehouses, usually surrounded by large blocks of ice, both prevented the wind from carrying the scent and made it impossible for bears in the area to reach directly into the warehouse. These warehouses were not built in a single area. They were always built in different places, because the Inuit were careful not to focus the bears' attention on a single spot. And how did the Inuit take precautions against cooking odors? Special cooking areas were built at a certain distance from the camp. Cooking stoves at safe distances, determined by the direction of the wind, prevented odors from cooking food from spreading into the living areas. Some Inuit communities built small kitchens surrounded by blocks of snow to cook in harsh weather and burned certain types of moss at the same time to disguise the odor of their food, luring bears with the smell of burnt moss. For the Inuit, the igloo was not only a shelter, but also a line of defense. An igloo camp set up in the wrong area could be destroyed by a sudden polar bear attack one night. For this reason, the location, structure, and defense mechanisms of the igloos were built with great care. The dome-shaped structure of the igloos is strong enough to withstand the weight of even a large polar bear. If a bear climbed on top of the igloo, it would not collapse because the weight was evenly distributed due to the shape of the structure. But the most important defense is the entrance to the igloo. Because the entrance was built narrow, low, and curved, a human could easily enter, while the broad shoulders of a large polar bear could not pass through. For the Inuit, the choice of campsites where they would build their igloos was also of great importance. Igloos were usually built on high places, because from high points they had a wide view, allowing them to recognize approaching dangers in advance. This method provided a great advantage in recognizing potential dangers in advance and taking early precautions. While polar bears could move and walk easily on flat surfaces, they avoided walking on rocky or uneven icy areas. So the Inuit placed large ice floes or large stones around the igloos. This acted as a natural barrier, keeping bears out of their habitat. Polar bears were most dangerous at night. At night, when the Inuit were asleep, a different method of defense was required. Certain areas were created around the camp and covered with compacted snow. When a bear walked through this area, different sounds would be emitted, and the approaching polar bear would be spotted much earlier. For the Inuit, this method worked like a complete alarm system. Another defense method for the Inuit was dogs. Inuit used dogs not only to pull sleds, but also as an early warning system. The dogs could smell polar bears from miles away and warn of danger ahead of time. When polar bears came too close to their habitat, the dogs would bark, both waking the Inuit and trying to drive the bear away. Dogs were also the community's most loyal protectors. But despite all precautions, there were times when polar bears came close to Inuit habitat. In such cases, running away from the bears is not an option, because a polar bear can reach speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour in a few seconds. It is impossible to run away from such a fast animal. In such situations, when bears approach their habitat, the Inuit would work together to carefully move the approaching bear away from the area. Some would make noise to distract the bear, while others would approach the bear from behind and try to lead it away from the camp. If the polar bear was too aggressive and attacked despite all efforts, Inuit hunters might have to use their traditional weapons. But for the Inuit, killing a bear was used only as a last resort. because although the death of a polar bear means that the threat is gone for them, at the same time, they don't want to kill a polar bear unless they have to, because they disrupt the natural cycle of nature. Let's take a look at the tools the Inuit used to defend themselves. The most important traditional weapon used by the Inuit for self-defense were spears called Nanuliak. The shafts of these spears were made of sturdy driftwood or whalebone with sharpened ivory or durable, sharp stones set into the tips. But what made these spears special was that their design was not meant to kill a polar bear, only to slow them down. The tips of some Nanuliak spears were designed to break off when they were thrust into a bear. In this way, bears were only slowed down, not killed. Of course, the Nanuliak was not the only weapon of the Inuit. They also used small throwing weapons called kajak. This weapon was used to shoot fast-moving prey and could also be used against polar bears if necessary. But such weapons were only meant to distract the bear, because they didn't have enough power to kill the bears. For this reason, Inuit often preferred to guide a bear away from them rather than fight it head-on. If a polar bear got too close to an Inuit and there was no chance of escape, they would make different noises and spread their arms to make themselves look bigger than they were in order to scare the bear away. In addition, one of the most interesting defense methods was to trick the bear by using their own instincts. When the Inuit spotted a polar bear that decided to attack them directly, they would throw themselves to the ground and play dead by remaining motionless. Like most other predators, polar bears would not want to immediately consume dead prey, so they would first sniff, then touch, and try to determine if there was danger. If the Inuit didn't move at all, the polar bear would often leave them and walk away. But this tactic was only practiced by experienced Inuit, because a wrong move would inevitably result in a polar bear attack. Given all this, the Inuits' greatest weapon was to read nature and the polar bear's minds. They saw a polar bear not as a threat, but as an animal acting in its own nature. They knew that if they knew when a polar bear was attacking, in what areas, and at what times it hesitated, they could survive without having to fight the polar bear. So, the real struggle was not a physical battle with the bears, but a battle of the mind with them. Today, modern weapons and fences with electrified wires are used to protect against polar bears in the Arctic, but the ingenious methods of the Inuit, thousands of years old, are still very much relevant. This delicate balance between polar bears and Inuit is a testament to one of the oldest struggles between man and nature. Nature ensures the survival not only of the fittest, but of those who understand it best. And the Inuit, a people who have lived and learned this truth for thousands of years, remind us that survival depends not only on physical strength, but also on knowledge and patience. In the endless whiteness of the north, the boundary between prey and predator is still as fluid as the direction of the wind. In this video, we discovered how the Inuit people fight polar bears and how they survive. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.